Thank you for staying with us. You're still watching The Breakfast on Plus TV Africa. Experts warn of inflation after 2025 budget passage. Economic experts have warned that the 54.99 trillion naira 2025 budget recently passed by the National Assembly could worsen inflation due to increased government spending. Key allocations include 14.32 trillion naira for debt servicing and 13.64 trillion naira for recurrent expenditures. Chief Economist at SPM Professionals Paul Alaje noted that inflation is a major trade-off of the budget. He cautioned that rising public expenditure could further strain the economy and push up consumer prices. Analysts urge fiscal and monetary authorities to implement measures that curb inflation while ensuring economic growth. They emphasize the need for policies that balance spending with price stability. Now, joining us this morning to talk about this is Muktar Mohammed. He's an economist. Good morning, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Good morning. All right, so experts have warned that this budget, could worsen inflation. Can you just walk us through it? What is the impact of this budget that has been passed?
Well, like the expert have said, everybody knows that the budget will worsen inflation, especially with the new hike from the budget now having about 18 trillion in terms of deficit. And then we had that increment due to what they say they've seen a new source of revenue. And then the National Assembly also added their own as usual. So definitely that means you have a lot of liquidity in the system. And what has really fueled most inflation, according to CBN, is there's so much liquidity that we have in the system. And some of them that are not even in the system, and those are why they try to hike rates to make sure that they reduce liquidity in the system, which at the end of the day is not helping the informal sector, which is largely driven by liquidity. So this budget, in terms of when you look at the budget, you look at debt servicing is governed over 68%, even if you are coming from a height of about 92%. You look at recurrent expenditure also, it's also a large amount of the budget. So definitely when you talk about fuel inflation, more or less is when you have so much liquidity in your hand. So that is also a major challenge that for inflation, so much cash in your hand and pursuing little product. But the challenge again is Nigerian current inflationary pressure. It's not just driven by this high liquidity in the system due to budget allocation. It's also driven by FX volatility, which is very high. It's also driven by fiscal policies. One of those policies is the 15% hike by the Nigerian Port Authority. That is also going to drive inflation because you are looking at an economy that's largely driven by importation of household items, especially food items, cars, most manufacturing machineries, and also all this will be affected. And so that means you see that cost of goods has gone up by 15% already. Fortunately, I think 4% from the custom have been suspended for now. And so that otherwise would have looking at 19% inflation. So when you look at the monetary side, you look at the physical side, you realize that the monetary side seems to be running, not running at the same level with the fiscal side. The fiscal side seems to be on a different wavelength from the monetary side. And so that's why we'll continue to have this inflationary pressure going forward.
So a lot of people are arguing because on one hand, inflation is an issue, but some people are also saying that high public expenditure can also help, with the economy. So is there a scenario whereby this can work, but it doesn't affect inflation?
Well, when high public spending has to impact positively on the economy is when that spending is being put in investments. And these investments are not driven by borrowed funds. So that's where we need to look at it. If your high spending is on infrastructure, that this infrastructure in turn will create jobs, and this job in turn will now add more revenue to the government in terms of tax payment from taxes for those working there, then definitely you are looking at that is going to reduce inflation because investment is a long-term vehicle that they catch. Whatever liquidity you have is tied to particular spot, not like what you need daily being used for one things or the recurrent expenditure like salaries or allowances. Those are daily, those are recurrent, those could happen monthly, some even happen daily depending on what they are doing. But when you talk about inflation driving, I mean, expenditure moving inflation is when some of these are done in the area of investment. So that creates job. That also improve industry because infrastructure also will have a growth in the industry or industry, a particular sector begin to enjoy it, drive that, create more employment. But once it's tied to expenditure that is tied to salaries and allowances, that for inflation. But when expenditure is tied to investment purposes, then that also will reduce inflation.
Fantastic. So some issues that, are being pointed out here is one, the debt servicing, which is about 14.32 trillion that is allocated for it, and of course 13.64 trillion for recurrent expenditure. How sustainable is this level of spending for the government? Because that's obviously a huge chunk of money, and one thing that we've always said is, why do we keep taking loans and we're not seeing the dividends of these loans? For instance, infrastructure, developing the nation, but we're taking the loans, we're not seeing as much, but still we have to pay these loans. With this recurrent expenditure and with this debt servicing that is taking about 20-something trillion naira, how sustainable is it for government spending?
Well, that's my worry. How sustainable is it for government spending? That's my worry because, again, government spending is likely going to be driven by revenue, and this revenue is not capped in hand yet. Some of the policies that are supposed to drive these revenues are not policies that are steady. You talk about one high export of crude oil, which is tied at 2.03 million barrel, 2.06 million barrel per day. You and I know the challenges that will do for the economy already, because again, we are not sure we'll be able to meet that target. That will affect our revenue projection. So that also will not add to the budget deficit. So that's one revenue will be having challenges about it. Then remember again, the tax reform bill is also one of those areas that we want to drive revenue. Even if we are beginning to see it to see the light of day. But you mustn't forget that bill also has been diluted by the political side of it. It's not going to come out as it was supposed to come out for. So, okay, that will also reduce the revenue from government. I think most of the revenue projection of government are very ambitious. And so that's where my worry is. Will you not, in turn, when you are not able to meet those targets that you've set to yourself in terms of revenue, then you will be forced to go back again to borrow, and that will increase the deficit and also increase the borrowing that we have been doing. So I think by and large, at the end of the day, I don't see how government will be able to meet their revenue target. It will take a lot. Like I said, it's a very ambitious budget. And also remember that they said they discover some new stream of revenue. And if a part of that new stream of revenue was the 4% that was supposed to come from custom, that has been suspended already now. So that also will affect the revenue. So there's a lot of challenges that the government will really have to deal with in terms of revenue, because despite those revenue, you begin to look at debt services and others. So if those revenues are not there, that means you might not be able to pay your debt. You may also begin to increase your debt to budget, and that will be a key challenge for the government. That's what I feel. I think they haven't gotten it right yet. They are, as far as I'm concerned, they are very ambitious, but they're ambitious with figure without reality check on those figures, whether those figures are really figures that will see the light of the day.
Interesting. For many people, they might just say, you know what, you guys are just talking Bangladesh. These are things on paper, we don't know what it is. But let's talk about the impact on this for the common man, because a lot of Nigerians are already, living with high costs, inflation, all of that. How would this affect Nigerians at the moment?
Well, inflation will still be high. Yeah, I mean,
maybe higher now.
Inflation. Yeah, it will be higher. The way it is, I don't see. Remember, government have an ambitious inflation figure of 15%. I've said it. I don't see how they are going to achieve that. But again, let's wait and see. Inflation will be high, like I've said. I've told you now. We have cost of goods coming into this country already. going to be high by 15%. So definitely that will drive inflation up. So you look at the exchange rate, which has been the key driver of inflation, is still very high. Though if you can look at it, it's in the corridor of stability between 1,600 and 1,570. So it's still high. So that has not been dealt with. That has not been brought down to the government target of exchange rate of 1,400, according to their budget presentation. So inflation is still high, and what it means is that cost of living will go up. And once that again cost of living goes up again, then you know that that means the cost of goods and services also will go up. You mustn't forget that also we have a monetary policy committee the monetary policy, whether the committee or the CBN have already hiked rate in terms of banks, ATM charges.
Yeah.
That also will be passed. That also will be passed to consumer. So you see a lot of policies that are going to have impact on the ordinary Nigeria, but positive on the companies that are there in their bottom line, because again, maybe government is looking at how these companies or they should be able to survive and provide services for Nigeria in the long run, which could also reduce inflation in the long run. But in the short term, what we are seeing with what we are doing now, definitely what it means is that inflation will be higher. And when inflation is higher, that means the cost of living also has gone up.
So with the cost of living going up, is there any chance that people's income will also go up at this time? Because we're still talking about minimum wage that is at 70,000 naira. And if we look at how much the exchange rate was maybe like 5 years ago, we're not even getting up to $100 per month. We're just making about maybe $50 or $60 a month for a month's work. And that is what some people obviously in the US or in the UK would make per hour. So if this inflation is going to hit us as hard as you're saying right now, what is the government doing about it? Are we going to see, minimum wage go up as well?
Maybe private establishment like your own will increase your minimum wage. But for the government, remember that they've already set up the minimum wage already. They say they hiked that rate by almost 100%, but you just took the dollar to the naira issue, the exchange rate, and cost of living, inflation, everything have watered down those minimum wage. So definitely. I remember that what the president said, that the minimum wage is supposed to be reviewed every five years, but he will try to review it every three years according to his meeting.
But in a case like this, Muktar, in a case like this, can't it be reviewed, when we're already seeing that the indices just doesn't work, for us to wait for another 3 years?
Well, again, you have to ask yourself, do you have the money to pay? Remember, there was a time that payment of salaries were being done by government by borrowing from financial institutions. So do you have that resources to pay? So when you are looking at minimum wage, you can see the states now struggling, because a lot of states say about 90% of what they get now, they use it to repayment of minimum wage. So you don't have 10% for infrastructure, and that doesn't work well. And that once infrastructure is not built, once you don't have that structures that will help businesses grow, what you see is that the few people will be enjoying the minimum wage. The private sector, which is the key driver, will be suffering, because that what it means is that a lot of all these private business are not going to be making so much. So definitely, and that will also have an impact on employability. That means a lot of Nigerians will lose their jobs. So it's something that when you look at this minimum wage issue, minimum wage is 70. But even when you take it to bigger industry, big sectors, how many of them can be able to pay above that 70,000 because of the current economic issues? That for me is a problem, whether with the private sector or the public sector. Because if you pay a living wage in the private sector, which we've seen employ over 80% of Nigeria, that will galvanize the economy. But they cannot pay that because of many economic challenges that they have. High interest rate, which means high cost of funding, high inflationary pressure, exchange rate volatility, paying high cost for importation of goods. So what they have even done at the private sector is to reduce the number of personnel they have. Forget about what you get from the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, which says that unemployment has come down in that area because of if you have a job every 1 hour. But like you rightly pointed that if I'm working in the UK or working in the US and I do a job for just 1 hour in a week, that means I'm earning virtually what a Nigerian is earning in a month.
Yeah.
But no laborer will be paid what you earn in a month in an hour here in this country. So it's a lot of you see, in the Nigerian economy needs a rejig, and this rejig has to come with the recurrent expenditure. Government should begin to look at their lifestyle. The lifestyle of the present administration does not, I say it, does not correlate with what we are supposed to be feeling or what we should be doing. Because you have an administration that have the largest numbers in terms of Federal Executive Council, the largest number in terms of board. And so these are recurrent expenditures. These are increasing the recurrent expenditure so that is for me the lifestyle of this current administration does not proclaim financial discipline. So that for me is a challenge. That's why you see this inflation will continue to go high. And again, salaries and allowances. When you talk about salaries and allowances, it's not, the civil servants are not really earning that much than the politicians. They are the ones that earn most salary and allowance. They are the ones that do a lot of trade. They are the ones that want to do overhead duties, and this come with allowances. So it's the current administration is not helping matter in foreign inflation because they are not physically they are not financially prudent in the way they manage Nigerian resources.
So for you, looking at the budget that was obviously being passed and knowing that, of course, we have an over-bloated cabinet, maybe the cost of governance should have been significantly reduced because we're looking at the recurrent expenditure that's taking a huge chunk as well. What are some things that you would have loved to see differently in the budget?
Oil benchmark is one thing I would love to see differently. Lower the benchmark so that you have enough for spending, especially when you have a Donald Trump that believes in low oil price. So I don't think we'll hit that. Then also our revenue projection should be a little bit lower. There's a saying that you under promise and over perform. That would have also been good. Then again, I would have seen a government that is prudent in terms of management of resources, in terms of reducing their overhead costs, in using cost-cutting measures to reduce overhead costs. But I don't think that is included also in the budget. I would have loved a budget that is still to PPP, public-private partnership, especially in the area of infrastructure. I would have been saying that, we are going to construct these kilometers of roads, but we are going to do it through public-private partnership. They will build and operate rather than a budget that we are seeing that government itself is spending so much in infrastructure. And they don't have that resources. So those are part of the things that I would have loved to see in this budget. Reduction in overhead costs, project reduction through the partnership with the PPP, and also a lower revenue projection, and that will mean a very prudent management of the resources. And a lower oil price that will also help in bringing in more FX into our reserve. And that also, like I told you, like I said, the main challenge that we have in the FX market today, volatility, is as a result of the inflation, and the FX market volatility is as a result of us not earning enough FX. So when we begin to build our reserve enough, then we'll have enough FX to be able to control the FX market for the CBN to intervene when they have to intervene to improve liquidity in that system and stabilize the rate. As it stands now, that rate is not still stable. So to do that, you need to bring in more liquidity into the system. Those are part, and one of the best way we can bring in more liquidity into the system is a lower oil price, which maybe you have an oil price, presently you have an oil price about $78, and even that has been reduced to like $70, then you now have a differential of about $8 that is being put into our reserve. That is huge, and if we are able to meet the oil production of 2.06 million barrels per day, you know what that would do to our reserve and what that would do to our FX market, and in turn what that would do to our inflationary challenges that we are facing.
So talking about intervention, what alternative budget strategies do you think we need to be looking at? And of course, monetary fiscal policies that you think the government can put just to ensure that, inflation is not so high, and then economic growth as well, because we want a win-win situation. Nigerians definitely want a situation whereby they don't have to break their backs just because they want to put food on the table. And then we want our economy to grow as well.
Well, interventions, first intervention is food security. And unfortunately, food security has to do with the insecurity. So physical side need to do more about that. So let's bring in more food. Especially the ones that we have control over. Local manufacturing food, the tomatoes from the north central, the tables food that comes from those areas. Let's see how we can get more of those foods into the market, and so that will also reduce inflation. For me, food security is key, because if you look at the inflationary figures that we have been seeing over the days, over the months and years, it's largely driven by food inflation. So we need to see that. I've said the other thing I said would have done also is to make sure we have liquidity in the system, and that has to do with government saving more rather than spending more, and that will in turn be able to stabilize the exchange rate. These are the type of intervention. I also talk about the PPT type of intervention. Instead of government constructing how many routes, look at the economic variable routes, and then do the PPP projection, whereby build and operate for the next 25 years. And then government will be able to save funds for social investment in health and agriculture. That's one area also. In health and education. That's one area. So the way you can reduce the burden on the Nigerians, especially the average Nigerian, is to make the educational sector very attractive for them to want to take their children to that school, to their work, to those schools. And so that will reduce their payment that they have to do in private schools, and that will bring in more liquidity into their hands, and that will help them begin to live at least a better life. But if you are not earning so much to invest in health and education, then you are just paying lip services. Because three key areas that government need to pay attention to.
Hello, Muktar.
Oh, I'm gone.
Hello, sir. Can you hear me? Hello, Muktar.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah, we lost you for a bit, but please go ahead. You're talking about three key areas that government needs to look into right now.
Yeah, the three key areas that government need to look into right now for me is government need to look at education, look at food security, and look at health. How can we improve this area? So if you improve this area, this will help drive more earnings into the average Nigerian hand, because it stands now the average Nigerian is really suffering.
All right, so the central bank, I'm sure they have a role to play in all of this, especially when it comes to stabilizing the economy, because that's what everyone knows. When there's inflation, anything that has to do with money, everyone looks to the central bank. So how do you think they can strategically just ensure that the economy is looking great?
The central bank know what to do. The only thing the central bank needs to do is to see how they can stabilize the exchange rate. They just have to stabilize that rate. If they do that, that's like a twitch weapon in handling inflation. I can tell you, once the rate is stabilized, inflation will naturally come down, because again, like I keep saying, 80% of what we use, we import. So the CBN major pain this year will be, you want to bring down inflation, then work on the exchange rate. That for me should be their key driver. Once they work on the exchange rate, they will bring down, they achieve price stability in every area of the Nigerian economy. So if you ask me what is the key goal for the CBN this year, make sure you bring that exchange rate to that 1,400, both in the parallel and the official market. That will be a key driver in reducing inflation.
And for the government, beyond 2025, what do you expect to see that the government needs to do right now?
PPP, public-private partnership. One, reduction in overhead costs of governance, management, prudent management of resources rather than doing white elephant projects. We have seen a lot of them that government is spending so much money on. So they need to begin to look at a project by economy, how much it can impact on the economy, rather than project just because of political gains.
Fantastic. All right, that's how much you can take right now. Thank you so much, Muktar, for coming. It's always a pleasure having you on our program. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Have a wonderful day, sir.
You too.
All right, so I'm speaking with Muktar Mohammed, who is an economist, and we've just been looking at the fact that experts have warned that inflation could rise after the 2025 budget passage. We'll go on a short break now. When we return, we'll be discussing our next hot topic, so please stay with us.